What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the Post-Traumatic Survival Show. My name is Ozzy Martinez, and I'm your host. Today, I have a very special guest with me because she's been very crucial in assisting me on my own personal journey with understanding mental health and understanding all my triggers and understanding and learning PTSD, but not just for me, but for my family as well, my wife and my kids. What makes her special is that she's a therapist at the vet center. And she understands what a veteran is going through, but she understands the perspective of the family as well. And that's what I think is crucial in assisting veterans and anybody that is dealing with mental health. So I want to welcome Irvin Flores to the show today. Irvin, welcome.
Thank you, Ozzy. It's a pleasure to be here. We've known each other for a while, and it's great to see you achieving such a sense of purpose and mission. I think is absolutely beautiful. So, PTSD is a highly misunderstood condition because it is a condition that is not the same as every other mental health condition. And I always like to kind of say that PTSD is not a condition that you're genetically predisposed for, meaning you can be born with a genetic predisposition for depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, all the other conditions that you find in what's called the DSM-5, right? But PTSD is specific condition that happens after trauma. And there's a neuropsychology and a neurobiology that happens when someone has, for lack of a better word, PTSD. And this may be, my mental health fellows out there are like, oh my God, what is she saying? But I like to consider that PTSD is not your run-of-the-mill mental health condition. Just because of that very, very same critical component of it, you have to be exposed to trauma in order to develop it. So just to kind of throw out some figures, right? On a civilian basis, your run-of-the-mill person, they can experience PTSD 4 out of every 100 during their lifetime, right? For veterans, mind you, I'm not talking about combat veterans. A regular, and I don't mean to say that in an off-putting way, but a veteran who has not been deployed to combat, they can experience PTSD 5 to 6 or 5 or 6 out of 100 in their lifetime.
Just a regular service member.
A regular service member. 6 out of 100 will experience PTSD in their lifetime. However, combat veterans experience PTSD at 37 to 42% incidence rate over a lifetime. And the really messed up part about PTSD is that it's self-renewing and self-refreshing, meaning you can have periods of your life where PTSD will seem to be more manageable, and then you'll stop being so manageable, and then you have to work at making it manageable again, and then you have to kind of be vigilant for those moments and times when it's no longer manageable. Now, if we were to go into the neuropsychology and neurobiology of PTSD, we would be talking about the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is a part of the brain that's actually connected to the prefrontal cortex. And these two parts are then associated to what's called the limbic system. So I know I'm throwing out a lot of neuropsychology terms.
It's all right. We could all Googleize these terms.
We can all kind of like, hey, let me look at a brain. But in essence, these parts of the brain actually regulate what is considered to be the stress mechanism. This stress mechanism, under any conditions, make people survive, make people live through certain situations. Now, going back to the numbers I gave before, a civilian will only experience that activation of that stress system very, very few times in their lives.
So you're saying it's literally a different type of stress system. It's a different type of adrenaline that kicks in when there's but it works differently in your brain or works differently in your body when there's that extreme traumatic event, or what's the...
I'm gonna go into that in a second. So a civilian will have that experience. Let's say they get into a car crash, when women give birth, all these mechanisms in which the body is going to be put through severe, intense physical demands that kind of force the body to say, listen, I have to get through this, I'm gonna get through this. But that stress mechanism in the brain, when that hippocampus kind of activates, goes into the pituitary gland, produces things like, certain kinds of corticosteroids, eventually releases cortisol, eventually releases other hormones. In civilians, because it's kind of like a flash, it turns off. Pretty much, our bodies are very smart systems. It kind of goes in there and says, okay, listen, you're done.
This isn't your normal life. This isn't a normal occurrence for you. You're done.
You're done. Turn it off, right? And you're able to, depending on the severity and nature of whatever made that stress system turn on, you're able to kind of recover, right? Yes, there are some things that happen, but you're able to kind of recover and get that system to operate normally. For people with PTSD, what happens to their stress...
Or for veterans,
or for combat
active
veterans,
members.
correct.
Okay.
That mechanism of turning off that stress response system gets broken at a specific part of the neuropsychology. And that is at something that's called the ACTH part, right? So the sensitivity to that hormone that now tells the system, hey, look, man, you can relax now. It's done, right? That sensitivity starts to go lower and lower and lower. And if you think about it in the context of what a combat vet is, about what a combat vet does, what first responders do, what first responders have to be exposed to, it makes sense because, and there's certain factors for developing PTSD. I say again, a genetic predisposition is not one of them, right? Okay. There are certain factors for developing severity and intensity of PTSD, but it is not likely that because a parent has PTSD, that a child will develop PTSD.
Right. So I get what you're saying. This is more of a environmental thing where environment will dictate if you're going to have PTSD Correct. Or not, where maybe a parent that is dealing themselves with schizophrenia, bipolar, some sort of mental health problem can cause a child to then have PTSD because of their upbringing and stuff like that. But what we're saying is it's not they inherited it. It's
Correct.
The environment created you to have
some kind of event in your life created that. So in the case of schizophrenia, even alcohol dependence, drug dependence. If one of the things that we question for, that we ask for is, what's your family history for mental illness? So that we're able to kind of map out, well, your mom had depression, your grandmother had depression, your aunt had depression. Well, you have a genetic predisposition to have depression. The same does not happen PTSD. I will say that for children, and I know we're kind of going into a little rabbit hole situation, right? But for children, there is something that's called secondary PTSD and intergenerational PTSD, right? The secondary PTSD is very, very straightforward. Children learn one way and one way only, and that is through modeling. So let me see what you do, right? How are you reacting to something that I don't see everybody else react to the same way?
Which is big because I've heard that when I was in college learning about mental health and stuff like that and adolescent mental health. One of the big things I learned is that there's a higher suicide rate in individuals that witnessed a family member or a friend or someone that they knew commit suicide while they were a child. So if I was a child and I saw my aunt commit suicide, I'm at a higher rate of committing suicide later on in life because I understood that was molded to me, that this is the way you deal with Correct. This hyper stress.
Correct. It's almost like a sense of normalized behavior. And if when we assess for suicide, if we have a high number of family members that are reported to have died through suicide, we do assess a higher risk to that person. But going back to secondary PTSD, children will see a parent become very anxious about traffic, right? Which is a huge trigger for a lot of combat vets. And I'm going to get into that in a second. But that child says, oh, okay, well then traffic is something that I need to be scared about, because that's what anxiety communicates. Hey, you better be scared about this. This is not normal. This is not relaxed.
So it's a learned behavior is what they're learning in a way. A learned reaction, actually.
Correct. For the secondary PTSD. The same kind of applies for intergenerational PTSD. And there's a lot of studies in the Jewish population of families that actually survived the Holocaust. And the changes that those Holocaust survivors applied to their lives are found up to 7 generations after.
Well, I mean, us Cubans could speak for that as well,
Absolutely.
Too. With the way that it's brought down and brought over everything you hear and feel, even 2 generations into it, you hear great-grandparents talking to their great-grandchildren or whatever about that. And yes, it's learned learned reactions is what you're learning.
Exactly. But I do want to make it very clear that the secondary PTSD, the intergenerational PTSD, we refer to it as PTSD, but it is not. The brain does not have the same neuropsychology mechanism as the person who actually experienced the trauma.
Right. You're not going to have that fight or flight.
Exactly.
It's just a learned reaction, learned behavior. Exactly. It's what it is. They don't know how to react with it the way that I go. Not 0 to 100, 99 to 100. Like I'm already there at 99. He's not. That person that learned that second behavior is not at 99 already. So
correct.
Okay.
Correct. They, for children, when they're little, they may look at the parent that has PTSD and kind of take you as like, okay, how are they reacting? Okay, let me react like them, right? Or how are they reacting? They have their own fear response and they moderate and modulate according to it. But it's exactly like what you said. They're not at 100 or 99 to begin with. Eventually, because of that modeling, they end up getting to like about 50, 60, 70, and that becomes their starting level versus like a 30 or a 40, a lot more baseline kind of idea.
They develop almost like a higher anxiety level of baseline than a regular person.
Yeah, because they learn to be more aware of fear as a presence in their life. And you said something earlier, fight or flight. There are two other Fs that most people don't actually talk about, and it's...
Freeze is one of them, right?
Yes, and what's the other one?
I don't remember. Fart? No, I'm sorry. I was just trying to bring some humor in this because you might shit yourself in a situation like this, right?
Absolutely.
Like so.
Actually, absolutely.
But in all reality though, it's a fight, flight, freeze, and what's the other one? Fawn. Oh, that's right. Fawning, when you just like curl up and...
Fawning is like... And I know that whenever...
And isn't that... people would think that's almost freezing, though, no?
No. So the difference between freeze is kind of getting to this place where you can move, but your reality doesn't break.
Okay.
Right? Which is a mechanism that goes with flight or can go with flight. Fawning is pretty much your brain saying and you saying, oh, my goodness, I cannot believe that this is happening to me. You may still be behaving and going through the situation, but... you kind of have this moment where you say, I cannot believe I'm here. I cannot believe this is happening.
So you got to get taken by the hand and moved out, because you're in just disbelief.
Because you're in this moment of just shock and awe. You're like, oh my God, this is where I am, right? Because the fight, everybody knows, or at least I think everybody knows the sense of what a fight is. I'm going to fight this out, right? And fight, and I'm going to come back to this, is the only mechanism in PTSD that remains the most vigilant, independent of recovery status. Okay, flight is either I'm gonna leave. The leaving is either physically leaving or psychologically leaving.
Does that fight stay as rowdy, as intense in combat veterans, first responders, compared to, let's say, a rape victim or an accident victim, or it's just throughout like that something that happens to PTSD? I guess what I'm trying to say is, does your education for your job, what you've been predisposed to, me kicking doors down and stuff like that, having that perspective of life where you have to be a fighter in a way, I think, is that more inherent into a person where you have that type of career, or it just doesn't matter as long as you have PTSD? It just depends on the person, if you're a fighter, flighter, freezer, or fawner.
In my experience, it's literally related to the kind of job that you do, because the types of fights are very, very different. So the type of fight in a combat vet is a lot more connection to anger, a lot more connection to hypervigilance, a lot more connection to hyperreactivity. So taking an event, listen, man, a veteran I love dearly used to always say the crazies are doing very well out there, right? And that's kind of hard to argue with, but crazies have been part of this world for forever, right? We can't remove the crazies, right? But how does everybody else deal with the crazy? They either just kind of let it go, or they kind of choose their battles. For a combat vet, especially if they don't have that well managed, it's like everything is a battle, right? There is no filter to kind of say, well, this is a 10, and no, you better not.
Oh, you're right. There isn't.
Right? To, I can let that go, whatever. That person doesn't matter to me. So everything, they do have a disproportionate tendency to do a fight, right? or to go into fight.
To fight things, right? To
To
fight
fight
what they're
things.
up against.
Correct. Even when they manage emotions. So it is very, very common for a combat vet to be experiencing an emotion, because that's something that that PTSD does to you when it affects the limbic system. It takes away the ability to identify or differentially identify
What's
the
a
emotion.
real threat? Oh, emotion. Okay.
Emotion. So everything, some of the more complicated emotions become really difficult to put into words, right? So they're going through something over here. It's something that maybe is confusing to them, and guess what? They're gonna pick a fight. They're gonna pick a fight with someone. They may not even realize they're picking a fight with someone, but whoever it is that comes across their path, whether it is and unfortunately, whether it's a wife, a kid, someone,
Or that person that cut you off right now.
or that person that cuts you off, and now you end up, trailing, chasing them
Yeah.
through 10, street blocks, trying to like lower down your window and be like, come on now. That brain kind of goes into them, and that is very likely to happen if a combat vet feels overwhelmed. Because in overwhelmed, think about it. Everything is going on around you, and you're like, what do I target, right? Where do I go? One of the things that makes a combat vet overwhelmed, that is greatly affected by PTSD, is that at any given time, we can only manage 6 things around us, right? And for a civilian who doesn't have PTSD, their brain is able to stay here. So I'm here, right? There may be things happening behind me. There may be things happening outside of me or outside of here, but I'm here, right?
Yeah, but the person with PTSD, I mean, at least in my perspective, is I'm trying to plan. All right, I'm trying to move from this situation, but now if I get into another city situation, and it's ruminating. You've taught me this word. It's ruminating. You're ruminating inside your head, thoughts and different things that might making things up that might happen.
Not only that, but it was very functional at a given time in your life, right? When you're in combat,
And that's why I asked you if there's more fighters with people that are police, people that are tactfully trained, because I'm trained to get myself out of shit when I'm into something right now. But then I'm also trained to get myself out of shit once shit hits the fan.
Correct.
In shit. So it's so people aren't.
Absolutely.
I guess in a way, I'm almost trained to be a fighter, not a freezer, not a.
Correct. However, it is not uncommon to hear people freeze in combat, and people getting kicked in the head, and being like, "You better wake up." You know what, right? So the difference, the real difference, right, is that again that loss of that filter of what is a fight, because what that robs of, what that takes away from you, for lack of a better word, is the being here in the now. Because this is a now, right? And this is a now that has a meaning, right? Going back to the limbic system, the limbic system, to put it very simply and direct, has kind of like these 3 stages. You go through an experience. Experience has a certain emotion. Emotions are very normal, people. The other day I saw a video that emotions, and you said the word earlier, emotions are like farts. That video was like, okay, man, that's a way of putting it, right? But that experience has an emotion. Out of that emotion, we construct meaning. What did that mean for me to go through that? And that's a technique that we use for something called CPT, cognitive processing therapy. You kind of take the trauma that sits heaviest with you, that bothers you the most, and we literally go in there and ask the question, when you look back at it, what meaning do you make of that? And in that way, by kind of starting at the end, we are able to walk it back to, okay, then what are the emotions? What emotions are you stuck at? And then eventually be able to kind of unload the experience. But when you cut that, when you cut, and that's what PTSD, it cuts, I call them bridges. It cuts them either at the experience to emotion or emotion to meaning. In the now, it's really hard for you to stay in the now, right? Because your mind is already going to, well, after here I have to do this, and not only that, there are ambient sounds. There's a car going on outside, right? And your brain is going to want to microshift to those sounds in order to determine whether it is
a threat or not.
a threat or not, right? So for a combat vet, once they kind of determine that sound is not a threat, they're able to disconnect from that, but That's happening all the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah, I noticed that. Sometimes I'll disconnect, and even in a conversation with someone, because something around maybe became a threat, or I don't know if it's a threat yet, and stuff like that. So I can't even be in the now, because I'm in the now. But if now happens in 5 minutes with that thing behind you, so it's so weird. Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes, it's not uncommon to hear combat vets kind of say, "Huh," and they have to kind of fake it, like they're staying in the thread of the conversation, because my words or anybody's words, they become like far away, because now their brain is connecting to something else.
I purposely stopped wearing my hearing aids so that I could say "huh" and get away with it, because everybody knows I wear hearing aids. So that now I just don't wear them. And then when that happens, I'm just like, "Huh? Sorry, I'm not wearing my hearing aids today. Can you say that again?" So,
man, that's a workaround. But that's because that brain is looking, right?
Right.
So it is very, very common for combat vets to be tired.
Which is why you'll also always notice combat vets and police officers, stuff like that, always wearing sunglasses.
Yes.
It's because we don't want to look rude while we're in a conversation, because our eyeballs are everywhere else but looking at you right now.
But again,
so we're tired.
Functional skills, that belonged to a certain time in your life. However, the rules of combat are not the rules of life. It becomes even harder for first responders, because the rules of their work must not be the rules of their life. But how do you actually do that when you are living in the rules of your job?
No, which is what I said to a guest that I had previously, that she spoke about when they were at the Surfside and stuff, and she said that what they started doing was having a hotel nearby gave them rooms and stuff so they could do their A and B shift or 12-hour shifts. So then they would go to the hotel and then go to work and hang out more in a deployment status style, which I said it must be tough for first responders, because you go home you're working in the community most of the times that you live in. You go home in that same community. So how can you ever drop your pack or stuff like that? Where we go on a deployment for 8 months, we know that's work. And then when we get back home, it takes a while for us to offload and supposedly detransition, all that stuff. But we're able to understand we are not in theater anymore. We are not at work. So we're dealing with our triggers, but in a way I'm able to compartmentalize that this happened in Iraq, this happened there, is what I've always thought. And then they just take it home. Yeah. How do they shut it down?
Yeah, but it does take a long time to make that transition to say, I'm not in Iraq. And even when a veteran has a tendency to be dissociative, and dissociative is part of that flight mechanism, you have this break with reality, often driven by very intense emotions, or like a wave that just kind of comes through, right? And when you dissociate, you start seeing Iraq and Afghanistan. You start seeing strikers right next to you. You start seeing Humvees right next to you. You start smelling stuff that's not supposed to be smelled at that moment, right? And depending on how strong that wave is, you stay there for a while, right? That's really unsafe if it happens in traffic.
Right.
That's really unsafe if it's happening to you in situations where that's not really.
And this is where it can lead to what they portray in movies and stuff like that. That scenario there, not knowing you just got triggered there, leads to then you thinking you're somewhere else, right?
Correct. Because, and that's kind of where I started. Everybody has this image of what a veteran with PTSD is, as like this angry, belligerent, crazy vet.
And hallucinator, right? We don't hallucinate.
No.
You get to there. It gets you. Something happens that gets you to there.
Look, hearing the voices of your friends who are no longer with you is psychiatrically could be considered a hallucination, right? However, it is part of the processing of the PTSD, especially as it relates to grief and loss.
It's more of a memory that you're kind of like the person that leaves that voicemail that their loved one left them. And they leave that voicemail there without deleting it, so they could go back and hear it and play it.
Correct.
Right? Well, we did that mentally in a way.
Exactly. So, that combat vet may hear that voice or may experience that a lot more often.
And to stick to post-traumatic survival, because this isn't just for combat vets. This can happen to someone that lost a family member to cancer or
Absolutely.
lost a child,
Absolutely.
and now they still hear their child laughing or something like that.
Correct.
So,
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, because, again, if I were to put it very directly, right, PTSD is the moment where your world broke, right? Where the things that you held dear broke.
PTSD is literally the big bang of
Correct.
your trauma.
Correct.
This is bad. That's it.
Yes. So, you heard me say earlier where there are some factors for developing PTSD. Well, for combat vets as well, I'm going to stick to combat vets and then I'm going to go into first responders. For combat vets, number of deployments. So for a subsection of combat vets, if you were stop lost and now you stayed there, you thought you were going to be in country 15, 16 months and now you're there 18, 24, that made a difference, right? If your unit deployed, came back, had 3 months R&R and then deployed again, that made a difference.
Right. So the intensity of your deployments and how often and everything, right?
Correct. Exposure to gruesome and grotesque injuries. Your body, your brain, there are some things that we have looked at that are really hard to make sense of. I'm not going to get into it because I don't,
right.
But I think everybody knows what I'm talking about, right? And when we are facing it, and our bodies and our brains are trying to make sense of things because we all catalog, we all put information into boxes and into places, and our brains don't necessarily know how to do that. Our brains have to do something to it. So gruesome and grotesque injuries, exposure to trauma involving children. For anybody who was in Iraq and Afghanistan, we all know that there was a high number of children that were utilized in a certain way, right? Those incidents, interestingly enough, and I don't know, maybe this is but if you were a lower rank, you were more likely to develop PTSD.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Why to you?
Because they're the ones working out there. They're the ones doing more. At least in my unit, staff NCOs and above weren't allowed to go on patrol.
Okay.
That's a decision command had made. So that right there tells you that you had maybe a staff sergeant, but you had normally sergeants and below, and the sergeant was your platoon, was your patrol commander, and you had a corporal that was the patrol sergeant or whatever, and then you had troops. So, you have them doing the more dirty work.
Power exerted over people.
Okay.
So, the military has a structure, and the rank protects that structure, protects organization, protects deployment, protects everything, right? But the lower rank means that you have a lot of other structures over you. And one of the mechanisms of addressing trauma is how much control do I have? It's actually the thing that then later on, when you come back to life, you try to exert control all the time.
Right. I've always told people that.
Yeah, even when it's detrimental against you. So the mechanism of a lower rank developing PTSD has a lot to do with the themes of powerlessness, helplessness, impotence, especially in context of an inhumane, uncaring, and incompetent leadership, or the perception that you had an inhumane, incompetent, and uncaring leadership. So it is something that then kind of sets up this mechanism when you come back to life, right? And it says to you, you need to be in control all the time. Right? Because ultimately, if we kind of talk about reactivity to PTSD or reactivity as it relates to PTSD, it's I don't want to be in that position ever, ever, ever again.
Which that's huge to think when you get out and you're trying to seek help or someone's trying to tell you to seek help. You're trying to then tell yourself to relinquish that control without even knowing that your brain wants control. Because once again, you were a big part of educating me and helping out with Operation WebEd at the beginning with the education part as a counselor and stuff like that on mental health and therapy and stuff like that. So now hearing that, it makes you really wonder, how can we educate someone beforehand or as they're getting out, or just this is the purpose of this podcast is I hope people hear this and understand that maybe you can approach therapy now differently because you're already approaching it with that mentality of I'm losing control. And in the VA's case, I'm giving control back to the people that I felt weren't good enough to be in control of me, the government, the military. So I could see now why veterans at least fight and are so hesitant. And other than the help not being good at a certain point, it has gotten better. But I could see how we are with friction going to the VA because we don't want to lose control. We're in control of our life. And now I have to listen to a doctor, right?
Well, that's actually one of the bases under which vet centers were created. And it was, listen, man, just walk on in. This is not a formalized treatment of any kind. Come on in, scope us out, check us out. And for the early generation, and I would even say the most recent generation, we still kind of apply the same thing. Come on in. Just walk on in. That's the only thing we ask, right? If you walk on in and you see us and you kind of get to know us, you scope us out. Why? Because that gives a person a sense of, this is my own decision. I'm in control here. No one, I didn't walk through a door and someone said, hey, by the way, you have 10 more appointments and you're seeing so-and-so and you're doing this and you're doing that. And now your brain, that mentality goes back to, well, now I need to follow orders. I mean, how much more control do I have in this thing? And it really set up a lot of the early Vietnam vets who were accessing vet center services for success because it allowed them to go in there and speak to the staff of the vet centers in a way that wasn't really formalized. It was just, you come on in and you're like, man, this is what I'm struggling with. And it gave this, I don't want to call it pretense because it sounds a little bit, manipulative, but it gave this idea of I am making my own decisions. I am approaching my treatment in my own way. And eventually, before people knew it, they found that helpful. And they found that sense of community, that sense of being together helpful. Interestingly enough, that is something that differentiates Vietnam vets from the Iraq, Afghanistan generation. Vietnam vets often went alone, came back alone. They had a lot of experience with replacements. They had a lot of experience being able to attach to people, where for Iraq and Afghanistan vets, a lot of the times, or for the most part, they
there was more cohesion. Yes,
there was more coalescing of units, right? And so a lot of the veterans, especially as it relates to PTSD and mental health, they either develop a good relationship to the people that they served with,
or even extremely opposite, worse one.
Exactly.
Yeah, I could see that.
Based on what that interaction was. So if they had a lot of loss downrange, a lot of them say, I don't want to know anything about anyone anymore, because now the survivors become reminders of who is not here. So it's not necessarily that they're rejecting the other person or that they're rejecting being around the other person. It's that, unfortunately, now you become a reminder for me and I become a reminder for you.
Or I guess even in my case, you know what your unit experienced downrange, and then all of a sudden you're dealing with problems, and you look on social media and they're doing great. So you create this extreme anger towards them because you know what they saw, how they should be feeling, right? And you're like, but they're doing great, supposedly, right? So yeah, I could see that happening.
And a lot of the times when people do, PTSD has 5, 10, 15, and 20-year marks, right? And we literally just went through the 20-year anniversary of Iraq, March.
Yeah, this year, 2003.
March 3rd, 2000.
Well, my unit's 20-year reunion is next year in September. I'm organizing that right now. About, I think, 70-something vets have already said they're going.
Excellent.
We're renting a lodge in Houston, and then it's going to be for service members only. The Semper Fi Fund is funding it monetarily wise and stuff like that. I'm coordinating it with them, and it's going to be 3 days, I think, or something like that. And I'm already curious to figure out how it's going to be because it's the 20th year and it's going to be in September, which is also like the big one for my unit. September 12th, September 13th. We lost 4 guys. In a way, it kind of was because they said, when do you want to do it? And I said, I guess, honestly, some of these guys would like to reunite around this time frame and stuff like that. And I think, in my perspective, and I hope I'm not making a bad decision. I might be forcing this upon certain people to do it at that time frame. That's what turned my life around in 2014 was that 10-year reunion that I went to, where it was like 50, 60 people got invited. I think only 15 showed up. But there I met Matt Puckett's mom, which is one of my really good friends that passed away in Iraq. And then I met his sister, his brother. They asked a lot of personal questions about that day when he passed away and the deployment. A lot of release of like this pressure cooker that I've had locked up forever was done that day. And it was all done during a time where normally I'd be shit-faced drunk, depressed somewhere, right? But this time some of us were drinking, but we were all with each other. And it was a good feeling. From there, like I said, conversations came out of it where I realized I felt like I wasn't alone. I remember speaking to you about it over the phone, and then you were like, yeah, you told me you just realized you're not alone. I was like, it felt great. And then I told you that's where Operation Wevet was going to start. And then I think that I would like to do this with everyone. And in this unit reunions case is right now we have everybody. I have from the first sergeant to the CO, who is currently now I think a full bird colonel in the Marine Corps. He's already said he's going. So I mean, a bunch of people are going to this reunion. So it's going to be everyone together finally to, I guess, talk and speak and stuff like that. And purposely done, I think, on September around that time frame, because I thought it'd be a good time for everybody to reunite and honor that 20-year anniversary. We are going to have some of the Gold Star family members there as well, too. So I did it purposely, I guess, on that.
It certainly sounds like it's going to be a very high intensity, right? And one of the things that inevitably happens in every single reunion is that, this is never done maliciously, mind you, but there's a sense of scoping you out, which is how are you surviving, right? And how do I compare it to how am I not surviving, or how am I not doing, right? And it is really hard to come face to face with those guys who may not be surviving as well as you think they are.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty sure the Semper Fi Fund has the way they have it like organized. There's going to be speakers coming in. We are going to have events and stuff, like we're going to go fishing together and doing things like that. So there is things to do together. It's not just you're going somewhere, we're paying for your thing for 3 days and you guys go get drunk. Thing. No. So there'll be things for us to do and stuff like that. I don't think necessarily per se maybe mental health counseling will be there. I would expect maybe they would.
I would check on that.
I'm sure there would be.
I'm partial to that.
Yeah, so if not, then I'll try to reach out to like the Houston Vet Center and see if they want to show up. But I know that they have it set up in a way where it is supposed to be a therapeutical. It is supposed to be a guided reunion. It's not just a shit show.
It's not.
So
because
because
I wouldn't necessarily call it a shit show, but
I would. I mean, you're gonna reunite 20-year veterans that hadn't seen each other in 20 years, marking an anniversary of Fallujah. So it would be.
Some things are gonna happen.
It would be crazy.
Yeah, I hear you. But just really kind of look out for that, because, like I said earlier, PTSD, especially after your last deployment, 5 years. So 5 years generally are the years where you're a civilian or a veteran. Now you're in civilian world and you're like, okay, man, I need to get a job. Maybe I have a wife. Maybe I have a couple of kids. I need to get this thing going, right? Maybe some things kind of come up for you. You start to experience the nightmares. You start to experience the irritability. Some things start to, pop up here and there. The wife maybe starts getting upset at you. 10 years, somewhere between those 10 years, you've already sought help at least once. Hey, something doesn't feel quite right. If you sought help, that help has already told you, hey man, this is a long-term thing. This will never go away, right? And I'm going to take a little detour here. I do not undervalue the idea that someone can recover from PTSD.
You're saying like fully recover?
I do not dismiss that idea. However, in my experience, PTSD stays with you for the remainder of your life. And like I said, it renews and refreshes itself. It goes up and down, up and down. I'm seeing it a lot here with the Vietnam vets. Right? They hit the 50s, the 60s. They were doing moderately okay. Comes the 60s, they retire. Guess what? Now they have nothing to do. And now they're home. They're 24/7 with their wives. And I know that sounds idealistically, romantically excellent. It is not.
But it's what I tell people. Everything that you've compartmentalized, this is why I tell people, oh, no, don't worry about it, bro. I stuff it all away and put it away. I'm like, dude, 20, 30 years from now, 10 years from now, it's going to open up.
Absolutely.
When you have nothing to do, it's going to show its face.
And for the Vietnam vet, they retired and then they had nothing to occupy that time that justified that compartmentalization. And now they're getting older and they're getting sicker. And there is one primary weapon for every combat vet: their body. What happens when your body starts to break down around you? And now the one thing that we can all kind of basically assume control of is no longer working against you, and you have illness that...
No, it's now working against you. Yeah.
And now you have illness that's kind of ravaging you. So as combat vets age, you could have periods of time where PTSD is manageable or managed in a certain way, and then life happens. Death happens, illness happens, family stuff happens, and now that PTSD is going to go up. But going back to around that 10-year mark, you've already accessed help at least once. You've kind of said, okay, I need to do something about this. Between 10 and 15, if you've accessed help, you're kind of saying, okay, I'm putting these things in play. I'm doing my tools, I'm going here, I'm going there, I'm taking my meds. But somewhere around the 20-year mark, I know this is going to sound a little...
I could kind of guess it already. You say, I got it. It's
yes.
that I got it mentality. Yeah. I got this.
Yes. And then you kind of go, oh, shoot, I don't, right? Because between that 15 and 20-year mark, you're like, yeah, this is good, man. This is good. I'm settled. I'm settled. And around 20-year mark, you're kind of starting to realize you're not as settled. You may have 1 or 2 divorces under your belt, right? Or yet trying another relationship to see how that goes. And let me tell you, relationships and PTSD, that's another kind of worms. We could be speaking 3 hours about relationships and PTSD, because that's just another kind of worms. But around that 20-year mark, when it really starts to dawn on you that you may not have it as much as you think you do, then there's a shift that you have to make, because that is what it's all about, Ozzy. The shifts that you have to make at any given time and how you're managing those shifts, to not allow those things to create a pack that is unbearable.
Which is what I tell people. When I started this studio, I think I remember having you, or I posted it. You liked it. A bunch of other people liked it. I wrote, I'm doing this is my new mental health, my new personal therapy or whatever. And it was just like, I think the desk and a chair. It was like, I'm working on this. And it was happening because I had just been diagnosed with either rheumatoid arthritis or lupus or whatever it is they're diagnosing me with. But to keep my head busy, because I already know this and I'm educated like within my mental health, I had to give myself an out.
Correct.
Because if not, then I'd sit there and other things would then come in and start hitting me in the face.
And you know what I always recommend? The exhaust and the out has to have a sense of purpose. I don't care if you end up, if the out needs to be, okay, listen, I'm going to navigate the canals of Miami, right? Looking for buried treasure. Perfect. Does that give you a sense of purpose? Does that give you a sense of contributing to your life, contributing to others? We always underestimate how much that has the potential of recovering that limbic system. And I know I'm not about to jump in the hippie train, but also engaging in a lot of mindfulness. You know, you and I have a friend in common that both you and I absolutely adore, but yoga, doing meditation. You don't have to be this person that kind of contorts your body 3 ways from Sunday, but really being able to take a moment to, again, be in the now. Because the breathing and the yoga and the relaxation forces your body, forces your brain to be in the now, right? So,
which is grounding yourself.
Absolutely. But creating grounding in such a way that is physical, bodily grounding, And if you don't have mastery of that, uh, it only goes down from there, right? Because of something you said earlier, you said, oh, you can defecate on yourself. Yeah, absolutely. High levels of adrenaline make the sphincters of your body relax. So it is not uncommon for people when they face high levels of fear to have them be shamed because they defecated on themselves, when in reality it was just an immense amount of fear. Right? So these are parts of the stories that never really come out, because like, oh man, how do I tell someone I pooped in my pants? Right? Well, yeah, you pooped in your pants because your body was trying to process so much adrenaline that it didn't know what to do with it, and all your sphincters just went, I'm out. In the levels of adrenaline that actually support functionality, your eyes see better, your ears hear better, your muscles are full of oxygen, your heart is pumping better, your muscles are just ready to go. But the difference between that adrenaline level and the adrenaline level that now has your belly kind of doing its thing, right? That level of difference is very, very small, right? Which, and again, there's so much to talk about PTSD, and I don't want to seem like a Debbie Downer. Oh man, this PTSD is an absolute crap, right? Everybody, the people who have PTSD, the combats that have PTSD, know that PTSD is a daily battle. Right? I mean, I could talk about somatic symptoms of PTSD. Combat vets with PTSD are more likely to have gastrointestinal symptoms, some kind of GERD or IBS. GERD is upper body, IBS is lower body. If you have a TBI, you're more likely to have sensitivity to light, headaches, migraines. Let's not even talk about the tinnitus and the constant kind of ringing in the ears that we can never really underestimate. You can develop your neuromusculoskeletal system, the collagen in your body can and does react to cortisol. And in reacting to cortisol, a veteran's body, a combat veteran's body, is aged 10 years above their chronological age. So I'm not even going to ask you how old you are,
Right.
But add plus 10, right? And we kind of go back to the discussion of the Vietnam vets. Right? Now you have someone who's 60 who, hey man, you and I are at a certain age.
And that's just
still young.
That's just PTSD. We're not even including in the Vietnam vets case Agent Orange, and then now in the current era, the burn pits and stuff like that.
Correct.
Everything else that causes to your body and stuff like that.
Yeah, because I really fully consider that the burn pits is going to be the Iraq-Afghanistan generation Agent Orange. I really, really do consider that it's going to be your generation's Agent Orange, and there's a lot more to be discovered as to what the impact of that is going to be in many, many more years to come. And the effect that that's going to have on people. But there's a lot to talk about PTSD and just kind of how it permeates into every other part of your life. I mean, it's a lot. PTSD is quite a bit.
Let's switch over to civilians now a little bit, because a lot of it, like I said, I feel veterans, first responders and stuff were more designed to fight, but you've brought up that some will freeze and stuff like that in certain scenarios. But how different really is PTSD in a combat veteran first responder compared to a civilian that maybe might have been raped or something like that? Or is it pretty similar? It's just all triggers and reactions is pretty much PTSD.
That's pretty much what it is. The difference is in longevity of the condition, intensity of the condition, and the patterns of, again, self-renewing and self-refreshing. So for someone who has been sexually assaulted, they will design their triggers, just to give a very kind of simple and potentially common sense example. They will design their lives to now be reflective of that sexual assault. So when I did some work with sexual assault survivors, one lady would actually, when her daughters would get home, she would undress them and would check them for signs of sexual assault. And it wasn't until I kind of go in there and said, do you ever consider that by doing that, you are victimizing your own children? She goes, no, I'm not. I'm trying to protect them. I said, no, you're trying to protect them within the scope of trying to prevent what happened to you. But there is no evidence that that's going to happen to them. But what you're doing right now of making sure that you look in their private parts and asking them a series of questions that you would ask them, did someone touch you? Did someone put their finger? For two young females, ages at that time, I think they were like 8 and 6. At 8 and 6 years old, your mom is asking you, has anybody put their finger in your vagina? That's traumatizing in and of itself. And it took a little while for her to kind of understand that. But if we're going to explore that from the civilian world, in a civilian-based PTSD, you have a person now modifying their life to say again or answer again the same question. I never want to be in that situation ever again. How do I prevent myself from getting there, right? The difference between a civilian and a combat vet is that the civilian, that situation is going to be all around them. The potential for a sexual assault is all around them.
Okay.
The potential for a tragic car crash is all around them.
You're talking about the veteran.
The civilian.
The civilian.
The civilian. The potential for, you get a bad call from the doctor. Oh my God, someone else is going to be diagnosed with cancer in my family. That's a form of PTSD. That's for a civilian. It's all around them. A combat vet now has lived in two worlds, and now these two worlds end up colliding and merging. That I would say civilian PTSD is worse than combat vet? No. But the numbers of combat vets developing PTSD are excruciatingly higher than civilians. So I don't think it's a comparison of, apples to apples, but it's a different type of comparison in that way. But it can happen.
And then finally, there is one thing that I remember asking you about once I learned it in school, and that's complex CPTSD, right? Complex CPTSD, complex PTSD. That is PTSD that happens to people, and combat vets, first responders, anybody could get this, but it's somebody that has just been multiple traumatic events, right? So someone that had a horrible upbringing,
correct,
and then joined the military, had that going on, and might as well gotten into a car accident as well. You're talking about 3 different things, right? And then this changes your perspective totally different. And this isn't even a more intense form of PTSD.
It is, because now the layers of themes that have to be addressed to again come into that place where you're saying, how did this break your world, right? How did the meaning of this break your world? So if a person, and there's a whole other avenue that we could talk about for MST, or which is military sexual trauma, but if a person saw a lot of violence in their childhood, let's say they saw a lot of domestic violence or community violence in their childhood, well, guess what? By the time they get to basic training and they're being screamed at, and the guy next to them who maybe grew up a little bit more sheltered, that guy is looking at that guy and going like, what's wrong with you? Like, this is peanuts, right? They don't know. They don't know that brain is still kind of experiencing the same chemical and biological reactions as the guy next door, right? Because their brain has already desensitized from whatever it is that they experienced in childhood, right? So it is that building upon building upon building upon building of traumatic experiences.
They've actually been able to physically flight from the place where they're at while going through this, is what you're saying. Like someone that grew up in a bad neighborhood and is now in boot camp next to that guy that grew up in a great neighborhood, both our brains are going the same thing, but I've just been able to disconnect
Absolutely.
and flight. Just go somewhere else in my brain, disconnect, and
or they see someone being kicked and it's like, oh, whatever. In combat, a person who saw dead bodies in their neighborhood at all times because they were involved in shootings. Combat is not the first time that they see a dead body. The guy right next to them, if it's the first time that they experience a kill, that moment is like shattering. They start to ask all those questions. Man, what the heck does that mean to me? For that person who has already experienced that, they don't ask the same questions, yet biologically and chemically, their brain is going through the same reaction. So complex PTSD, in essence, becomes you get to be exposed to more trauma because your threshold of trauma was already very high to begin with. Right? And with complex PTSD, all of the reactions, all of the expected reactions of PTSD, I don't want to say multiply them by 10, but yes, multiply them by 10. Because now there's going to be, we start talking about a certain experience in combat, right? But it'll be really hard to crack that sense of, well, why that experience? Why did that mean? And they can seem very disconnected, aloof, detached from the experience, because in reality, the experience that maybe kind of shocked them into being exposed to killing is actually seeing a shootout when they were little.
Yeah, when they were 6 years old, 7 years old.
Exactly. So, how do you even start to unpack some of that? So yeah, complex PTSD is really hard to treat.
Awesome. I think we've kind of just scrubbed the top layer of PTSD, because like you said, more importantly, MST. I want to definitely bring you in and talk about MST Absolutely. At another time, because we talked about it a little bit within the civilian part where you were talking about the individual, the lady that was searching her daughters and stuff like that, where then I was going to ask you, I mean, I might as well just ask you now, but we'll divulge more into it in another episode. Like, now you're talking about an individual, let's say that's a service member that experienced MST, has MST, military sexual trauma, as well as whatever combat experience they just witnessed.
Correct.
So, the purpose of this podcast and what I'm trying to get at with hopefully the more episodes I'll have with you is educating the family, the surrounding, and the person dealing with PTSD, so that we don't create that second hand trauma on our kids. Because that was, I know, big for me, was I didn't want to make my kids, I guess, make them feel like that it's normal to have a psycho dad, or like, and it's a horrible word to say.
Yeah,
but
I don't like those words.
I know you don't like those words. I say them because it's me and whatever, but I understand that it offends other people. But
no, why I don't like it? Because it creates a sense of, and I was asked this question not too long ago. Hey, my kids are gonna grow up and they're gonna think I have a crazy dad, and I said, oh, stop right now. You are not crazy. This is not crazy. Right? Your responses had a moment, had a place, had a belonging that they don't fit now, and that we need to kind of figure out how to make these responses fit. Because, mind you, some of these things are actually quite valuable, right? Listen, guys, I'm a civilian, right? Some of the civilians are in la la land. They have no idea. They lack awareness, and I don't mean to offend any civilians listening to the podcast, but the civilians have no awareness, and in this world you have to have awareness. You have to have
I get what you're saying, and that goes along.
I don't want to piss people off.
Let's just say civilians are more complacent. They're just more,
to use a military word.
To use the military word, where in my mentality it was like the sign you would see before leaving Camp Fallujah was complacency kills.
Absolutely.
So civilians are able to just relax more, let go more, where we don't. We think complacency kills.
Correct. And so the ability to relax is always just a tiny bit or a lot of bit outside of your reach, right? So, yes, it's something that deserves a lot more discussion in that way.
Yes, it does. So once again, I thank you for coming on today, and I look forward to having more conversations with you.
Of course, I look forward to it too.
All right, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Make sure you tune in every month. Right now, I'll be releasing a podcast once a month until I'm done with college, because right now this semester I'm taking 5 classes. So it's a big load, doing all the work, trying to keep a high GPA, and then recording and editing myself these podcasts. So I'm going to do once a month for you guys right now, and I'll try to throw a little bit smaller episodes here and there. But make sure you guys tune in, follow us and subscribe on YouTube, and follow and like us everywhere else where podcasts can be heard. Thank you very much.